Hey everyone, welcome back to another Vibe video for AP Statistics. I'm Ria.
I'm Romy,
And I'm Mahadev.
and today we're going to be talking about p-value and significance levels.
But first, what is statistical significance? Well, statistical significance tells us whether our results are meaningful or just due to random chance. So if we say our results are statistically significant, then it means that our data has provided strong evidence against randomness and for possible correlation between variables. It's a key concept that's used to decide if a claim or finding can be trusted in research and experiments.
So now we're going to talk about what p-value is. P-value is the probability, assuming that the null hypothesis is true, of getting a sample result as extreme or more extreme than the one that actually observed due to the random chance. So in other words, p-value is a number that helps you to figure out if something you observed in the data is it likely or like likely by chance or is it real.
So what does the p-value tell us? A p-value tells us how likely our results are if the null hypothesis was true. A small p-value means that our results were unlikely if the null was true, so we have evidence to reject it. And a large p-value means our results were consistent with the null, so we don't have enough evidence to reject it. Remember, the p-value doesn't always prove the null is true or false. It just shows how surprising our data would be if the null was true.
Now, what is significance level? The significance level, or alpha, represented by the A, sets the threshold for how much error we're willing to accept in our results. It represents the chance of rejecting a true null hypothesis. In other words, the chance of making a type 1 error. Common alpha levels like 0.05 or zero point zero 0.01 indicate how strict our test is. The smaller the alpha level, the stronger the evidence that's needed to claim significance.
So now we're going to talk about the relationship between p-value and significance level. So if the p-value is less than your alpha level, which is usually 0.05, but it's stated in the question, then you reject the null. This means that it is statistically significant. If, however, your p-value is higher than your alpha level, that means you fail to reject the null hypothesis and it's not statistically significant. Note that on the AP exam that you cannot say accept the alternative hypothesis. Stick to saying fail to reject the null.
So now we're going to go through an example. Take a minute to pause and read the question. Yeah, so a school claims that at least 90% of its students feel safe on campus. A student surveys 100 randomly selected students, and 85 say they feel safe. At a significance level of 0.05, is there evidence that less than 90% of students feel safe? So the first step is to state our null hypothesis, which is that 90% of students feel safe, and the alternative hypothesis, which is that less than 90% of students feel safe. So step two is to plan our proportion and our conditions out. So for this test, we're going to be using a one proportion z-test. So before we run the test, we have to check these three conditions. If it's random. So it says in the problem that students were randomly selected, so that condition is met. We have to check if the sample is large enough. So we check if the sample size times the proportion is greater than 10, and the sample size times 1 minus the proportion is greater than 10. And these are both true, so that means our sampling distribution is approximately normal. And we also have to check independence. So the 100 students represent less than 10% of the total school population, so this condition is satisfied. Since all conditions are met, we can proceed with the one proportion t-test. Next, we want to calculate the sample proportion. So which is 85 out of 100 students. So p hat is 0.85. We then use the z-test formula to compare our sample proportion to the hypothesized value of 0.90. Substituting the numbers in gives us a z-score of negative 0.527, which measures how far our sample proportion is from the claimed proportion in standard deviation units. This z-score value gives us a p-value of 0.229. So now we can conclude using our p-value. And we can compare this to the significance level. So at a 5% significance level, our p-value is 0.229, which means that the data does not provide enough evidence to reject the null hypothesis. So we fail to reject the null hypothesis and conclude that there isn't strong enough evidence that fewer than 90% of students feel safe on campus.
Let's take a look at an AP question now. Pause the video to read the question. Okay, the correct answer is B, and this is how to solve. First, you have to recognize what type of test this is, and since there's only one proportion given, it's a one proportion z-test. And then, since this is an AP calculator question, you're allowed to use the calculator to solve for p-value. So you can use the stat function on the calculator and then test. And then if you go to one prop z-test and input all your data, p null being 0.41, x being 245, n being 600, and prop, and then saying prop is not equal to null proportion because it says it's different, and then calculate. The result for the p-value that you'll get is 0.933. And then if you realize that this is significantly greater than any reasonable significance level value, since it's usually 0.05 or 0.01, and our p-value is 0.933, we need to fail to reject the null, which means that there is no statistical evidence. And that gives us answer option B.
Thank you guys so much for watching this video. We hope it helped you to understand p-value and significance level. If you guys have any more questions, feel free to check out vikinginitiative.com or text in the WhatsApp group chat. Thank you.